Hey guys, happy first part of the week. This is a new unit we're going to start. We've wrapped up our thermal energy unit and now we're going to start the electricity unit. And I get to introduce the electricity unit, so I'll start things off and then Mr. Marquis and Mr. Flugum and we'll keep her going. So here we go. First things, just for starters, is as you guys know, I'm not telling you you don't already something you don't already know if you're 14, 15 years old or 16 or whatever. We use a lot of electricity for different things. So just everywhere here on the planet and even on other planets, we use a lot of electricity. We're using it all the time for different things. Some of the sources of electricity, you got hydrothermal plants, you've got geothermal plants, you've got coal burning plants, future things like tide energy. We'll get electricity from the tides and solar electricity. So a lot of different sources, but we're not really going to go into that right now. So we're going to start with the most simplest, just the basic way that we've known electricity has existed for eons is the fact that we experience it all the time when we touch things and when we look up in the sky, depending on where we live. So static electricity is just when you're picking up loose electrons and you become negatively charged, and then you emit those electrons into something. So if you touch a doorknob, it's one of the reasons that self-serve gas isn't legal in Oregon is they're concerned that somebody won't touch something before they touch the gas nozzle, and they'll emit a spark, and that would ignite a fire. So with all the gas fumes, so yep, static electricity. Some of the background stuff that you need to know. Some of the materials that won't allow electrons to pass through them, freed up electrons. So are insulators. So we use insulators to keep or to prevent the flow of electricity. You use insulators all the time to protect ourselves from electricity as well. So these are things like rubber, petroleum products, plastic, oil, wood, glass, all these things we use to make things like circuits and slow down the flow of electricity. Then there's things we use they're supposed to speed up the flow of electricity. So obviously we put copper in our wires. That's any precious metal is a superconductor. We use gold actually for things that we send out of into space. We'll make wiring out of gold because it really allows the flow of electrons to pass through it. So those densely packed atoms just allow electricity to flow through them. So we use a lot of copper when we make wires. These are just some examples of both. This has 5 electrical conductors, 5 electrical insulators, so things that prevent electricity from flowing through. Okay, it's important when you're dealing with electricity to provide grounding, and that's just a path for those electrons to flow. If you get big surges of electrons like from lightning strikes, you need a way for them to get to the ground, to reach the ground without damaging what's inside the building. And in our homes, that's usually pipes that ground your house. So you have plumbing and things that go down eventually into the ground, and electrons would just pass right through. If they were to hit your roof or a tree nearby, they would pass through pipes into the ground. And the biggest buildings in any community usually have lightning rods on them. Even if you look at some of the big, tall buildings around Dallas, you'll see lightning rods on the top of them just to pass those electrons to the ground. Okay, so 3 terms that I want you to become familiar with as we go through with electrons. The first one describes the amount of pressure that electricity can pass with. So if you go from an area with a lot of electricity to an area with very little, you're going to have a huge pressure difference. And that pressure difference is referred to as voltage. So when you've got a lot of electricity in one place and very little in another place, you're going to have a high voltage. Electricity flows from a place with high electrical pressure to a place with low electrical pressure, just the same way that water does. As a matter of fact, the water analogy can be used a lot when we talk about electricity. Volts are a measure of the difference in electrical pressure. So we have 120 volts or 230 volts, depending on what appliance we're using. But that's what that's all about. How hard that electricity is coming out, too. Once a switch is closed and electrons are able to flow from a negative or high voltage part of the battery to the positive, the battery, it functions like an electron pump. So a battery will just pump electrons in a single direction, from negative to positive. We refer to batteries as dry cells, because inside a battery you have a carbon core and you've got a paste, the kind of moist paste of zinc in there, and so it just allows electrons to flow from one side of the battery to the other side of the battery. Car batteries we call wet cells because they rely on chemical reactions that take place in wet, in moist conditions on the inside of the battery. Usually wet cells pack a bigger punch. They've got a little bit more voltage, so a lot more voltage. Another term you become familiar with as we talk about electricity is resistance. So the wire on the right there is going to have less resistance than the wire on the left. And resistance is just how much is preventing electrons from flowing. And the wire on the right, the big fat wire, the big heavy gauge wire is what electricians would call it, has very little resistance. So it's going to allow a lot of electrons to pass. Then when you go to a narrow wire, you're going to have more ohms of resistance. That omega symbol down in the lower left, that stands for ohms. Volts is V. Okay, so you think of it just like water, right? So if you have narrow stream banks, you're going to have a lot of resistance. If you have wide stream banks, you're going to have not much resistance. The water can really flow. And as you restrict the flow of electrons, you have more ohms. So more restrictions. So that if you put a lot of different things in an electrical circuit, you're slowing down electrons. You're going to have a lot of ohms of resistance. Okay? So think of voltage like how hard the water is coming out. If you take a fire hose and point it at somebody, you're going to blow them backwards. That's going to be like voltage. And then think of ohms like how big the hose is. So a little tiny hose would keep electrons from flowing through it, a little tiny wire. If you were to stick your thumb in the end to spray somebody, that's going to give you even more resistance, more ohms, and increases your voltage too. Okay, there's one more thing to talk about, and that would be like the equivalent of if you're looking at a home and you're looking at the water analogy, how many gallons per minute is provided to that home? So how many gallons per minute maybe come out of that well, or does the city water provide? Well, in the case of electricity, how much electricity is passing by that particular area at a given time, and that's going to be referred to as amps. Okay, so amps would be the flow of electricity, the current. The symbol we use for that is I. We'll talk about that next slide or next unit. But amps is the measurement of current. Okay? So amps tells you how much electricity is flowing through a circuit. Ohms is the measure of everything within the circuit, kind of slowing it down or resisting the flow of electricity. And volts measures the pressure difference within a circuit. And circuit, that word, I keep talking about circuit, it comes from the word circle. Okay, so electricity needs to flow in a circle called a circuit. So as you can see, electricity flowing, and that all the way back to its source, and that's going to make that light bulb, the filament in that light bulb, light up, heat up and light up. So the most basic type of circuit that we're going to talk about is a series circuit. In a series circuit, electric current enters the circuit from a wall plug-in or a dry cell like in the picture, and the current flows through something. In this case, light bulbs. That's going to provide resistance. So as the light bulbs provide the resistance for that electrical flow, they're going to heat up and the current will flow back to its original source. So you want to have something in between that negative side of the battery and that positive side of the battery, where you're talking about a short circuit, and that could cause a spark or a flame. So you need to put different things, you know, electricity needs to be doing something, moving a fan blade or making a buzzer buzz. And if it's not doing that, it could cause a spark. So electricity passes through something and then back to its original source. Okay. Downside of a series circuit is that if something isn't functional, the whole thing won't work. So if you shut down a switch, or what they call open a switch, then nothing works. Or if maybe just one light bulb went out, then nothing would work. So that's the downside of a series circuit. If you put together a circuit that's done in series and one little thing goes out, I'll go back to that original slide. Okay, if one of those two light bulbs wasn't working, then nothing would work. So that's the downside of a series circuit. The other type of circuit is a parallel circuit. So in a parallel circuit, you've got two paths for electrons to flow through. So electrons can go here, and electrons can go here, and that's a parallel circuit, a little more complicated. Okay. The advantage to a parallel circuit is that one bulb can go out and the rest will still work. So in your home, most rooms are wired in parallel, so you can turn your lights off, but your dishwasher still works and stuff like that. So, okay. So now I'm going to give you some questions, and the first questions are always the same. First question: what's your name, period, teacher, all that. Okay. All right. Question number 2. Static discharge occurs why? What's flowing when you touch a door, see a knob, see a spark jump from your finger? How does a person walk across a carpeted floor and become charged? So you can answer any one of those questions. Question number 3, can you see any materials in these pictures that are insulators? How are they being used? Why do we use insulators? Question number 4, when you touch a battery to steel wool, it can cause a fire, and this is because you've created a short circuit. So here's some questions. Why would having no wires or light bulbs or fuses create a short circuit when you can touch a conductor? Answer the first question, this is your other choice, but use the word ohms and resistance in your answer. And then the last choice, if you want to, explain how having a few more items in between the battery and the steel wool would reduce the likelihood of a flame. Okay, question 5. Here's a schematic that a person would use to make a blueprint for a circuit. So what type of circuit is this? Of the two types talked about, what type is this? This would represent a battery, symbolize a battery. These could be light bulbs, they could be buzzers, they could be anything, generators, motors. So, and then this solid black is a wire. So that's a question. What type of circuit is this, and are there advantages and disadvantages? Next question. What do these symbols mean? Particularly, I'm talking about this symbol right here and this symbol. So this omega and then this V right here. What do those mean? This last question is kind of for fun. It's pretty complicated. You have to kind of look at it, but it was an attempt somebody made to try to explain volts and amps. So if you can explain that, cool. If you can't, that's okay. I'm going to go back through those questions if I can. I think I have about another minute and a half. So here we go. Let's go back to question number 1. What's your name? What period do you have science? Who's your teacher? Question 2. Static discharge occurs. How come? Why? Why does it occur? Almost running out of time, so I'm kind of trying to go quick on my questions. Do you see insulators being used? What are they being used for? Question number 4 talks about touching steel wool directly with a battery, that causing a short circuit. So why would that be a short circuit, and what would you need to do to prevent it from being a short circuit if you didn't want a short circuit? This is an old survival tool. People will bring this instead of matches someplace if they want to get a fire going, and it's effective. It works quick. Be careful as summer dries out. Don't play around with it. Okay, next question. What type of circuit is that? Are there advantages or disadvantages to that type of circuit?